4 bikers rolled into my driveway under the Arizona sun, engines growling like a threat. One of them grabbed my wife's arm and said she had violated HOA rules by hanging laundry on our porch. A shove, a scream, and silence that split our quiet Desert Hills street like a gunshot. 12 years married, and I had never felt rage like that. Clean, white, absolute. They did not know who they were dealing with. I did not shout, did not move fast. I just stepped forward, watching their confidence drain one heartbeat at a time. Some men hide behind noise and numbers. Others let silence do the talking. Have you ever seen that kind of small power where you live? Because in my world, justice does not wear a badge, it watches. Then it acts. The air that day was dry enough to sting my throat. It was 1:17 p.m., and heat shimmered off the gravel like a warning. I had been fixing a loose hinge on the side gate, half listening to the desert cicadas, when the roar came. Not a car, not a truck. Bikers, 4 of them, cutting through the cul-de-sac as if they owned it. I remember thinking, who rides in this kind of heat unless they are looking for trouble? Then I heard Laura scream. It was not a long scream, just enough to freeze my blood where I stood. When I stepped into the driveway, the tallest one was holding a folded paper with a red stamp across the top that read, Violation Notice, Desert Hills HOA, Section 12.4.1. He read it out loud like a bad actor in a courtroom drama. Unauthorized display of personal items visible from the street, he said, staring at the clothesline. Laura's white blouse fluttered in the hot wind. She looked so small next to them, her hands trembling, but her eyes locked on mine. I could see she was trying to stay calm, though her voice was gone. I stood there, a few feet away, saying nothing. The biggest one turned and smirked, asking if I was the homeowner. I nodded once. He said, Then tell your lady to follow the rules, or next time we will handle it differently. He tapped the paper against his palm, pretending authority. The badge on his vest caught my eye. A fake HOA emblem in dull brass, the kind you order from the internet. My gut told me this was not about laundry. It was about control. Behind him, another biker revved his engine, laughing under his helmet. I asked quietly, You think this is funny? He shrugged, spitting near the gravel. Just doing our job. Pal, HOA sent us. The words rolled out casually, but that line told me everything I needed to know. No legitimate HOA sends muscle to a doorstep. Someone wanted to make a point. Someone wanted us scared. Laura tried to pull her arm free, and the first man pushed her back. Not hard enough to knock her down, just hard enough to remind her he could. That was the moment the switch flipped inside me. 15 years of service had taught me how to read escalation before it happened. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. My breathing leveled. The anger burned off and left something sharper. I was not thinking about revenge. I was thinking about evidence. I turned slightly toward the porch camera, the one I had mounted last week but never finished wiring. It blinked once, a faint red light under the glare. I did not know then that this shaky little device would record everything. That camera would become the first thread in a chain that would unravel the entire system. The tallest biker leaned closer, his voice low. Listen, man, just join the HOA, pay your dues, and there won't be any more visits. I stared at him, memorizing every detail. The cracked visor, the scar across his chin, the smell of gasoline. I asked, You done? He frowned, confused, then said, Yeah, for now. They climbed on their bikes and rode off, gravel spraying under the tires, the sound echoing down the hill long after they were gone. Laura was shaking. I took her hand and said, Go inside, lock the door. She did not argue. I stood alone in the driveway, the heat pressing against my neck. The paper lay on the ground, edges curling from the sun, Section 12.4.1. I had never heard of it. We were not even part of the HOA. But there it was, stamped like a verdict, inside. I opened my laptop and started searching. The Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 33. Chapter 16. We're clear. No HOA could annex a property without 80% homeowner consent. My lot sat outside their boundary by 47 feet. Exactly. I had bought this house for that reason. I wanted peace. No committees, no neighbors with clipboards pretending to be law. By 3:30 p.m., I had created a folder labeled Desert Hills Incident. I saved screenshots of the HOA bylaws, recorded a voice memo of what had happened, and backed up the footage from the porch camera. Experience taught me that the best time to prepare for war is before the first shot is fired. That night, Laura tried to make light of it. She said maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they had the wrong address. I told her no. I had seen the way they stood, the way they spoke. This was not random. These were hired hands, and someone higher up had pointed them at us. I lay awake past midnight, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. My mind replayed the scene over and over, the shove, the badge, the paper, the silence after they left. Each detail settled like a coordinate in a mission brief. Whoever sent them wanted compliance. What they got was my attention. The next morning, the laundry line was gone. Laura had taken it down before sunrise. Only the camera remained, blinking red beneath the eaves. I adjusted it, tightened the screws, and made sure the light stayed steady. Out here in the desert, sound travels far, but truth travels farther. As the first light hit the ridge, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The desert morning had that strange stillness after a storm, even though no rain had fallen. I woke up before 6 a.m., made coffee, and sat by the window watching the horizon blush red over the ridge. Laura was already up, watering her succulents by the fence, moving slowly, carefully. From a distance, she looked peaceful again, but I could tell by the way she kept glancing toward the street that the night hadn't erased what happened. The quiet was too fragile, like the pause before a verdict. I told myself this was a temporary calm, the kind soldiers learn to recognize before the next strike, by 8 a.m. I drove into town for supplies, trying to act normal. Desert Hills wasn't big, just a spread of homes stitched around a few stores and a gas station that doubled as a diner. The owner, Carl, waved when I walked in. He'd heard something. People always do. "Heard about some bikers raising hell out near the ridge," he said while filling my thermos. That close to you, I told him it was nothing, a misunderstanding. But the way his brow tightened told me he didn't buy it. Small towns run on word of mouth, and once it starts, it never stops. On the way back, I noticed a dark SUV parked by the HOA office on Maple Drive, the same logo on its door as the paper they left behind. Desert Hills HOA, preserving community standards. I parked across the street and watched through the windshield. A woman stepped out of the building, mid-50s, tall, expensive haircut. She spoke sharply to a younger man holding a stack of files. Evelyn Briggs, HOA president. I had seen her photo on a newsletter once. She looked exactly like someone who thought order was a personal duty, the kind of person who mistakes power for purpose. When I got home, Laura had left a note by the coffee pot that said, "School meeting at 11, back by 2. Her handwriting was neat, steady, like she was trying to prove she still had control. I cleaned the porch, fixed the loose hinge I'd ignored yesterday, and checked the camera feed. The video was still intact. I made copies on 2 flash drives and stored one in the shed. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. Years in the field had taught me that people in power hate 2 things: witnesses and evidence. I had both now. Around 1:30 p.m., a white pickup stopped in front of the house. A man in a polo shirt stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Pierce?" he asked. I nodded. I'm from Desert Hills HOA compliance office. We received a complaint. His tone was rehearsed, polite enough to sound legitimate. You're mistaken, I said. My property isn't under HOA jurisdiction. He flipped through his papers, pretending to read. Well, that's being reviewed. There's a motion to annex the Outer Ridge community into our district. I could feel the heat rising behind my neck. Without a vote, I asked. He smiled thinly. The board has discretion under Section 10.1.3. I already knew that was false. He left a pamphlet on my porch before driving away. I didn't touch it. Inside, the house felt too quiet. Laura came home not long after, her face flushed. Someone from the HOA came to the school, she said, asked about our address. They said something about community outreach. I could hear the tremor under her calm. It was a new kind of violation. Quiet, bureaucratic, personal. I told her to sit, handed her water, and said, "They're testing us." She nodded, tears welling but never falling. "Why us?" she asked. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew we were about to find out. That evening, I walked the perimeter of our property. The sunset bled orange through the mesquite trees, long shadows cutting across the gravel. I stopped at the old fence line, measuring again the boundary marked on the deed. 47 feet outside the HOA's mapped limit. I'd checked it twice. Once, when I bought the land, and again last night. Facts are like anchors. They keep you steady when someone starts shaking the ground under you. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I let it ring. Whoever it was, they didn't leave a message. Dinner was quiet. Laura ate little, distracted. Afterward, she said softly, "Maybe we should just move. Adam, before it gets worse." I set down my fork. "That's what they want," I said. "If we give in, they'll do it to the next family, and the next." She nodded, but I could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. Fear does that. It shrinks you from the inside out until you start giving away your peace, one compromise at a time. I wasn't about to let that happen. Not here, not again. Later that night, I sat at my desk and went over the documents I'd printed. Section 12.4.1. Section 10.1.3. Title 33. Chapter 16. The language was intentionally vague, typical HOA wordplay meant to confuse, not clarify. But what caught my eye was a clause about community improvements, authorizing land repurposing for development partnerships. I typed the phrase into a database and found a link to a company called Desert Builders LLC, same address as the HOA's mailing office. That was my first real clue. The calm was cracking. At 10:45 p.m., a faint rumble passed outside. I turned off the desk lamp and looked through the blinds. A pair of motorcycles idled near the corner, headlights off, engines whispering low. They didn't stop long, just enough to remind me they could. I watched them ride away into the darkness, leaving behind that old familiar hum of threat. My pulse stayed steady. Fear is a signal, not a command. I opened my laptop and noted the time. Evidence is patience in disguise. By midnight. Laura was asleep. I stepped outside, barefoot on the cool concrete. The desert wind had shifted, carrying the faint scent of creosote and dust. The camera blinked red above me, steady, recording, somewhere out there. Someone thought they were untouchable. Someone who believed intimidation could erase boundaries and rewrite the law. But I'd seen systems like this before, built on ego, hidden behind paperwork, convinced of their own permanence. They always forgot the same thing. When pushed, truth doesn't retreat. It waits. Then it returns stronger. The night ended the same way it began. Too quiet to trust. The stars over desert hills looked sharp enough to cut through the dark. I stood there a long time, the sand cooling under my feet, the hum of the world slowing down, calm, but not at peace. That's the thing most people never understand. Before justice arrives, it always whispers first. By the time the sun reached the top of the ridge, the air was already sharp enough to taste. Laura left early for school, leaving behind that quiet trace of perfume she always wore when she wanted to feel strong. I stayed behind, sorting through yesterday's printouts. Each document was another piece of the puzzle, dry legal jargon that smelled like power hidden in fine print. Around 10:30 a.m., I decided to clear my head. There was a small cafe on Main Street, the kind with dusty blinds and the best black coffee in town. I needed a place where my mind could stretch, where I could watch and listen without being watched. The bell above the door jingled when I walked in. A few locals nodded, the kind of greeting that said they'd heard something but didn't want to ask. The waitress, Bonnie, poured me a cup before I even opened my mouth. "Rough week," she said. I smiled faintly. Something like that. I sat near the window, back to the wall. Habit more than paranoia. Outside, the street shimmered under the heat, and I caught sight of a motorcycle parked 2 blocks down. Same style, matte black tank, desert dust clinging to the rims. My pulse slowed, not from fear, but focus. At 11:15 a.m., the door opened again. A woman in a navy suit stepped inside, sunglasses resting on her head. Evelyn Briggs. I recognized her from the HOA newsletter and that meeting I'd watched through my windshield. She didn't notice me at first. She ordered tea, not coffee, and spoke to the barista like someone giving instructions, not placing an order. Her voice carried that brittle confidence of a person used to control. I turned slightly to catch her reflection in the glass. She was alone, which told me she believed she was safe. People like her only appear solo when they think they have already won. When she finally saw me, her smile looked rehearsed. "Mr. Pierce," she said, walking over. "What a coincidence." I gestured to the chair opposite mine. "Sit." She did, carefully, adjusting her purse on her lap. "You've caused quite a stir in Desert Hills," she began. "There's no need for conflict. Join the association, sign the agreement, and we can move forward." Her voice was syrup sweet, practiced. I took a slow sip of coffee and let her speak. "People who love authority often confuse silence with surrender." I asked, "Did you send the bikers?" The question broke the rhythm. Her lips twitched before she regained composure. "Those men are part of a community safety initiative," she said. "Volunteers. They might have been a little overzealous. Overzealous was an elegant word for assault. I kept my eyes on hers. My wife was grabbed," I said. "That's not enthusiasm. That's harassment." She leaned forward slightly. "Be careful with your accusations. Mr. Pierce, Desert Hills values its reputation." I nodded slowly. "So do I," I said. "That's why I record things." Bonnie came by to refill my cup. Evelyn's smile returned until Bonnie walked away. "I know your background," she said. "Former Navy, correct. You should understand order and chain of command. Every community needs structure." That was her tell. She thought discipline meant obedience. "Structure works when it's earned," I said, "not when it's forced." Her expression hardened. "You're not doing yourself any favors. The board will proceed with annexation whether you agree or not." I leaned back. "Then you won't mind if I make this conversation public record?" Her voice dropped an octave. "That won't be necessary," she said. "We prefer to handle matters privately." I smiled faintly. That's the problem with private power. It hides accountability. She stood, gathering her purse. "Think carefully about your next step. Mr. Pierce, Desert Hills doesn't tolerate troublemakers." She turned and left, her heels tapping a cold rhythm across the tile. The cafe fell silent again, just the hum of the fan above me. I watched her SUV pull away. My reflection in the window stayed calm, but my mind was racing. She'd confirmed what I suspected. The annexation wasn't about fences or flowers. It was about land, leverage, and money. I finished my coffee, thanked Bonnie, and stepped into the heat. The air was thick and unforgiving. But clarity has its own coolness. Sometimes confrontation isn't about shouting. It's about seeing the lie blink before it collapses. The drive home felt longer than usual. A red pickup followed 2 cars behind, maintaining distance. Every turn I made, it mirrored. I didn't accelerate, didn't brake, just drove. When I finally turned onto my road, it continued straight, but that small hesitation before pulling away was deliberate. They wanted me to know. Watching works both ways. I parked and waited, counting seconds until the sound of the engine faded completely. Laura was waiting on the porch. "Someone was here earlier," she said, voice thin. "A man took pictures of the house. I asked if she caught a plate number." She shook her head. "He left before I could." I checked the footage. The glare from the sun had washed it out. "We'll fix that tomorrow," I said. "Better system, better angles." She nodded, trying to hide her relief. Plans are stronger than promises. That evening, I sat in the office with the window open, air dry and electric. I went through the HOA bylaws again, tracing every reference to Section 10.1.3 and 12.4.1. Buried in the fine print was a line about development partnerships, granting the board temporary control of properties under review. That phrase, temporary control, was the door they were kicking open. The developer, Desert Builders LLC, had the same address as the HOA headquarters. I had my proof. At 10:40 p.m., I turned off the lamp and looked through the blinds. 2 motorcycles rolled slowly past the corner. They didn't stop, didn't speak, just presence. Nothing else. That's how intimidation works. You make fear visible, so the mind does the rest. I reached for my phone, documented the time, and noted the sound. Fear without panic is information. I had enough to turn information into leverage. Midnight arrived quietly and still. Laura was asleep. I stepped out under the stars, the desert humming softly beneath my feet. The camera light blinked steadily, and the house behind me felt smaller but stronger. I thought of Evelyn's words about structure and obedience. People like her build walls of paper and call them justice. I've seen what happens when that kind of wall meets truth. It doesn't crumble. It shatters. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a coyote howled, low and distant. The sound echoed off the dry hills, fading slowly. I looked toward the horizon, breathing in the dry night. The battle line was drawn now, not in the sand but in the system. And that was fine with me. I'd fought worse wars with fewer weapons. The first piece of justice was already in motion. Silent, invisible, inevitable. Morning came gray and silent. The desert air felt heavier than usual, as if it knew something was about to shift. I woke before 6 a.m., the kind of early that doesn't belong to peace, but to planning. Laura was still asleep. I moved quietly through the kitchen, poured coffee, and opened the folder on the table. The HOA documents were spread out like a battlefield map. Every line hid something, but now I knew where to look. Evelyn's words echoed in my head. Temporary control. That phrase had teeth. I typed it again into the county registry search bar and waited. When the result appeared, my stomach tightened. Desert Builders LLC wasn't just a developer. It was a shell company tied to a larger firm out of Phoenix, called Vista Management. The CEO's name appeared on several HOA filings as a consultant, and beside it, another familiar name, Evelyn Briggs. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was protecting investments. The HOA was a front, a legal machine disguised as a neighborhood committee. It wasn't about community. It was about land seizure through annexation. A quiet heist, executed with paperwork instead of guns. That was the hidden motive. By 7:30 a.m., I was already on the phone with an old friend from my service days, a man named Carter who now worked for the county assessor's office. "Check Horizon Vista management for me," I said. He hesitated, then sighed. "Pierce. If they're involved. Tread lightly. They've got connections. Political ones." "I'm not looking for a fight," I said. "Just facts." He laughed once, dry and sharp. "You always say that before the fight starts." I hung up, knowing he'd still look. Some men don't need promises. They just need a reason. I drove out toward the edge of desert hills, where the land dipped into dry creek beds and the wind smelled like copper. A construction sign stood half buried in sand. Its letters faded. Future development. Horizon Vista Estates. Below that, a small print notice read, "Approved by Desert Hills HOA." That was the link. They'd started work quietly, using the HOA's name to bypass county oversight. It was fraud hidden behind community improvement jargon. My pulse stayed steady. When you've seen real corruption overseas, you learn to recognize the smaller versions at home. They all start the same way, with greed dressed up as order, back in town. I stopped by the cafe again. Bonnie raised an eyebrow when she saw me. "Back already," she said. "Coffee helps me think," I replied. She smiled and poured. The place was half full, quiet, sunlight cutting through the blinds in dusty lines. I opened my laptop, connected to the cafe Wi-Fi, and began pulling property tax data. As I worked, I noticed a reflection behind me in the glass, a man sitting at the counter, pretending to read the paper but glancing up too often. Same type as before. Watchdog. I kept my rhythm slow. People watching you expect a reaction. You win by giving them calm. At 9:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Carter said, "You were right. Horizon Vista paid HOA board campaign donations last year. Check file 12B. That was all I needed. I downloaded the document from the county's public archive. It showed multiple transactions labeled community partnership grants, legal on paper, dirty in intent. Evelyn had turned HOA policy into a profit pipeline. And the annexation of my property wasn't a mistake. It was phase 1 of expansion. The reason they targeted me was simple. My land stood right on the proposed access road. I sat there, staring at the map. Every path led through my boundary line. If I gave in, they'd pave the way for full control. If I resisted, they'd use pressure, intimidation, maybe even another staged incident. But this time, I wasn't just reacting, I was documenting. Every sound, every visit, every piece of paper. Evidence was stacking. Justice isn't a moment. It's a buildup. The first truth had surfaced, and with it came something sharper than anger, a sense of purpose. When I got home, Laura was in the garden, pruning quietly. I told her what I'd found. Every detail, every connection. She listened, eyes narrowing. "So it's about land," she said. "It's always about land," I replied. She took a deep breath. "What will you do?" I looked at her, then at the ridge beyond our house. "Expose it, but carefully." She nodded, and for the first time in days, I saw the faintest smile. "Then we do it right," she said. The strength in her voice reminded me why this mattered. Some fights aren't about victory. They're about restoration. That evening, I compiled everything into a single file, labeled it Desert Hills Evidence, and encrypted 2 copies. One went to a secure drive, the other to Carter. I wrote a brief note. If anything happens to me or Laura, send this to the Attorney General's office. I didn't plan to disappear, but preparation is the difference between fear and readiness. At 8:30 p.m., the sun melted behind the mountains, turning the sand blood orange. The world looked calm again, but calm doesn't always mean safe. Around 9 p.m., a knock came at the door. Laura froze. I signaled her to stay back. Through the window, I saw a man in a polo shirt, holding a clipboard. Mr. Pierce, he called, just delivering a notice from the HOA. His voice was casual, almost friendly. I opened the door halfway. He handed me an envelope, smiled, and left. Inside was a formal letter of violation, citing unauthorized exterior surveillance devices. They were trying to disarm my protection. Clever, but predictable. I placed the letter on the table and said aloud, "You're running out of moves." Later. I stepped outside. The desert was silent except for the hum of distant crickets. The camera light blinked, steady as a heartbeat. I thought about Evelyn again. Her kind always forgets one thing. The system they manipulate can also bury them. Bureaucracy cuts both ways. If she built her empire on paper, I'd dismantle it the same way. The law isn't just a shield. In the right hands, it's a blade. Midnight came soft and still. I sat by the porch with my laptop open, drafting a formal complaint to the state regulatory office. Every sentence I wrote carried weight. Evidence, date, time, statement, witness. Truth had a rhythm. And I followed it until the screen blurred. Laura came out, wrapped in a blanket. She touched my shoulder. "Come inside," she said softly. "Not yet," I replied. "Justice doesn't sleep." She didn't argue. She just stood there beside me, watching the stars breathe over the ridge, for the first time since it started. I felt control tilt back toward me. The hidden motive was no longer hidden. I had names, links, proof, and resolution. The calm in me wasn't surrendering now. It was a strategy. The air smelled like rain that never comes. That kind of promise the desert always makes but never keeps. Still, I knew what was coming. Justice, when it moves, moves slowly. But once it starts, nothing stops it. The next morning broke with a thin haze crawling over the hills, the kind that turns everything pale and uncertain. I woke before 7 a.m., my body already running on a kind of quiet adrenaline. Laura had gone to work early, so the house was still, the air heavy with coffee and dust. I opened my laptop and checked the county website again. Overnight, new records had been posted. The HOA's financial statements were now public, listing expenditures for community improvements. Almost $50,000 had been withdrawn over the past 6 months with no invoices attached. I leaned back, staring at the numbers. Every lie leaves a paper trail. You just have to know where to follow it. By 8:15 a.m., I called Carter. He answered on the first ring. "Pierce, you're making waves," he said. "Someone from Horizon Vista called my office this morning asking why I was looking at their files." "That means we're close," I replied. "Send me what you have." There was a pause. "You sure you want it in writing?" he asked. "Always," I said. "If it's not written down, it never happened." 10 minutes later, a secure link hit my inbox. I opened it and saw internal memos referencing a community expansion project, tied to Desert Hills HOA. The name that appeared at the bottom of each document was the same: Evelyn Briggs, board president. The pattern was clear. Evelyn had used HOA funds to acquire parcels of land outside the legal boundary, transferring ownership to Horizon Vista under temporary maintenance agreements. Those agreements gave the developer authority to clear, grade, and resell the land before homeowners even realized it was gone. A clean transfer. Legal theft, if no one looked too closely. I printed the documents and stacked them beside the growing folder labeled Evidence. Every page was another inch of leverage. Justice isn't about drama, it's about patience. At 10:30 a.m., I drove to the county office. The receptionist recognized my name before I said it. "You're the one asking about Desert Hills," she said, voice careful. "That's right," I replied. "I'm filing a formal complaint." She handed me the forms, eyes darting toward a man across the hall. He wore a suit too dark for the desert, pretending to study a bulletin board. "Developers get nervous when you start asking questions," she whispered. "Be careful." I smiled politely. That's the plan. As I filled out the paperwork, the man left, phone to his ear. The message was clear. I was on their radar. Back home, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, marking every date and signature. Laura returned around noon, sweat on her forehead from the walk. "You look like you're mapping a war," she said. "I am," I replied, just without bullets. She leaned over the papers, reading quietly. "This one," she said, pointing, "mentions a public hearing next week." I checked the details. The HOA board was holding an emergency meeting to ratify annexation procedures. They were accelerating their plan. "We'll be there," I said. She looked at me, uneasy. "You think they'll let you speak?" "They'll have to," I said. "It's public record now. At 2 p.m., I received another call from Carter." "Listen," he said. "I found something else. There's an email chain between Evelyn and a zoning commissioner named Dalton. She's promising him a cut of the redevelopment contract if he pushes the annexation through." I could hear the disgust in his voice. "That's bribery. Pierce. Straight up. Send it," I said. "If I'm going to fight them, I want every inch of truth." 5 minutes later, the emails arrived. The words were blunt, transactional, without shame. Evelyn wrote, "Once Phase 1 clears, Horizon Vista will transfer a 15% consultant fee." Dalton replied, "Understood. Keep it quiet." That was all the proof I needed. I forwarded the file to the State Ethics Commission, attaching my statement and signature. It felt good. Not triumphant, but grounded. There's a different kind of calm when the truth finally has a place to land. Laura came into the room as I hit send. "That's it?" she asked. "For now," I said. "Now we let the system eat itself." She smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed worry. "You think they'll back down?" I shook my head. People who hide behind power never retreat. They double down. But that's fine. I've spent my life reading the calm before the storm. At 6 p.m., I stepped outside, the desert glowing in soft gold. My neighbor, old Mr. Harlan, was standing by his mailbox. He waved me over. "Heard about your trouble with the HOA," he said. "You're not the only one. They fined me $300 last month for painting my fence off-white instead of bone." He spat into the dirt. "Bunch of crooks." I told him about the hearing, about the evidence. His eyes lit up. "You get them, son," he said. "It's about damn time someone did." It wasn't just my fight anymore. The community was waking up. Night fell more slowly that evening. I sat on the porch, files beside me, watching the first lights flicker across Desert Hills. Somewhere out there, Evelyn was preparing her defense, crafting statements, maybe even erasing records. I almost admired her efficiency. Corruption rarely sleeps. Around 9:30 p.m. My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. I answered. A man's voice said, "You should stop digging. Mr. Pierce, you're about to cost some important people a lot of money." I didn't speak. Silence is a weapon if you know how to hold it. The voice continued, softer now. "Walk away while you still can." Then the line went dead. I stayed on the porch for a long time after that, listening to the hum of the night insects, feeling the desert's pulse under the wind. They wanted fear. What they didn't understand was that fear, once named, loses its power. Inside, Laura had already locked the doors and checked the cameras. We were no longer victims of their intimidation. We were witnesses, and witnesses, when patient enough, become prosecutors at midnight. I looked over the horizon and felt something shift. Not victory, not yet, but momentum. The system they built to control us was beginning to expose itself, layer by layer, document by document. Evelyn could threaten, manipulate, and conceal, but the structure she relied on was cracking from within. I didn't need revenge. I needed truth to keep breathing, long enough for sunlight to find it. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it starts with the sound of paper sliding into an envelope, waiting to change everything. By morning, the wind had turned colder, rolling off the ridge with a dry whistle that sounded almost like a warning. I woke around 6 a.m., poured coffee, and watched the camera footage from the night before. Nothing but still frames of silence, the kind of peace that always feels temporary. Laura left early for work, and I spent the next hour reviewing the complaint I had filed. Everything was in motion now, but the higher the stakes, the more desperate the powerful become. I knew the next move would come from inside their circle, not from the shadows of the street. At 9 a.m., I got a message from Carter. Meet me at the old diner on Route 7, it said. Not safe to talk on the phone. That line sat heavy in my chest. I drove there an hour later, keeping to side roads. The diner was half empty, the air thick with the smell of grease and burnt toast. Carter was sitting in a booth by the window, eyes sharp, posture tense. "You're not going to like this," he said as soon as I sat down. "Someone from inside the HOA reached out. Says they want to talk, but only in person. They claim to have proof that Evelyn forged several board votes." My pulse slowed, not from fear, but from the awareness that something had shifted. At 11:30 a.m., I met the insider. Her name was Marlene Shaw, former HOA treasurer. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. We met in a small park behind the library, far from the HOA office. "I can't keep quiet anymore," she said. "She told me it was just accounting adjustments. But then I saw the transfers. Funds moved from member dues into Horizon Vista accounts, all under community maintenance. It's theft. Mr. Pierce. I signed off on some of it before I knew what it really was." Her voice cracked slightly. "If I go public, she'll destroy me." I looked at her and said, "You've already taken the first step by talking to me. Now let's make it count." She handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on here. Transaction records, board emails, and even the signed approvals. I copied it before I quit. I slipped it into my pocket. Why now, I asked." She hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. "Because she's planning something bigger. The annexation hearing isn't about your land anymore. She's pushing to extend HOA authority into the entire valley. That would give her control of almost 300 properties." I felt the weight of her words settle in. Evelyn wasn't just corrupt. She was building an empire, one fake signature at a time. By 1 p.m., I was back home, scanning the files. The data was clean, organized, damning. Every transaction is tied directly to Evelyn's approval. There was even an email from her to the Horizon Vista CEO that read, "Phase 2, ready pending zoning clearance." Attached to it was a map showing the new proposed boundary that stretched beyond Desert Hills, deep into unincorporated land. I printed the files, marked each line, and called Carter. "She's expanding," I said. "We've got to stop her before the hearing." He exhaled slowly. "You think the county will listen?" I said. "They will when they see this." At 4 p.m., a black SUV parked across from the house. 2 men sat inside, pretending to check their phones. I watched them through the blinds, calm and deliberate. Fear can be useful when it's under control. I noted the license plate and wrote it down. Laura came home around 5 p.m., and I told her to stay inside. "They're watching again," I said. She nodded, her face pale but steady. Let them, she said. You're doing the right thing. Her resolve gave me strength I didn't know I still had. By 7 p.m., I met Carter again. We sat in his truck near the overlook, the sun bleeding out behind the desert hills. He plugged in his laptop and opened the flash drive. This is enough to sink her, he said. But you need to be careful. If she senses this is coming, she might try to spin it, claim it's doctored. I nodded. Then we make sure the chain of custody is airtight. We submit it through legal counsel, time-stamped. He glanced at me. You've done this before, haven't you? I looked out at the horizon. Not like this. But I've learned how to fight people who hide behind procedure. When I got home, it was dark. Laura was sitting on the couch with the lights off, watching the window. They left, she said quietly. The SUV drove off about 20 minutes ago. I sat beside her, the exhaustion catching up to me. It's almost over, I said. Tomorrow, we take this to the state investigator. She looked at me, her eyes tired but proud. You really think they'll act fast? They will, I said. The truth has weight. It just needs time to drop. That night, I backed up the files again. 2 copies to separate drives, one hidden in the garage, the other sent through encrypted email to Carter. Every move I made was measured, intentional. I had spent years learning patience, and now it was paying off. Evelyn's empire was beginning to fracture from the inside. Her own treasurer had turned. The numbers were undeniable, the trail too clear to bury. Justice was shifting from theory to momentum. Around midnight, I stepped outside. The desert was completely still, stars sharp as nails across the black sky. I thought about Marlene, about the fear in her eyes, the tremor in her hands when she gave me that flash drive. Sometimes courage doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers just loud enough to be heard. The wind brushed across my face, and I closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint rhythm of hope again. Justice isn't a single strike. It's built, one truth at a time. Tonight, the foundation had formed. Evelyn didn't know it yet, but her own ally had handed me the key when the storm came. It wouldn't come from the outside. It would come from within her walls. That is how corruption ends, quietly, precisely, and completely. The next morning, the desert sky was cloudless, a hard blue that left no place for lies to hide. I woke before 6 a.m., showered, and sat at the table with a cup of black coffee. The flash drive from Marlene lay beside my laptop. Small, silent, powerful. Today was the day I would deliver it to the state investigator. Laura came out of the bedroom, hair tied back, still half asleep. You sure you're ready? She asked. I nodded. More than ready. This ends today. She smiled faintly, though her eyes told me she knew it was far from over. Truth doesn't end things. It begins the next battle. By 8 a.m., I arrived at the state office in Phoenix. The drive took nearly an hour, the desert stretching endlessly on both sides of the highway. I had rehearsed every word in my head. Inside, the air conditioning hummed with bureaucratic indifference. A receptionist took my name, then led me to a conference room where a man in a gray suit waited. Mr. Pierce, he said, extending a hand. I'm Investigator Reyes. I've reviewed your complaint. Do you have evidence to support your claims? More than enough, I replied, sliding the flash drive across the table. Financial records, emails, board votes, and one recorded statement from a former treasurer. He nodded slowly, inserting the drive into his laptop. As the files loaded, Reyes' expression changed. This is extensive, he said. You're alleging large-scale fraud within an HOA under state jurisdiction. If this is verified, it could lead to criminal charges. I don't allege, I said. I'm showing you the truth. He scrolled through the documents, his eyes narrowing. Horizon Vista, Evelyn Briggs, Zoning Commissioner Dalton, he murmured. This goes deep. I sat silently, watching him piece together what had taken me weeks to uncover. After a long pause, he looked up. We'll open an official investigation. You've done the right thing, Mr. Pierce. But you should be prepared. They won't go quietly. I smiled faintly. Neither will I. When I walked out of the building at 10:30 a.m., the sunlight hit like a furnace. My phone buzzed with a message from Carter. You stirred the nest, it read. County officials are scrambling. Evelyn called an emergency board meeting for tonight. I texted back one word. Perfect. This was the turning point. I wanted her reaction on record. The moment she realized her web was collapsing. As I drove home, I passed the horizon line where the desert met the heat shimmer. Justice always starts slow, then burns fast once it catches oxygen. Back in Desert Hills. The neighborhood felt different. People were out front, whispering, glancing toward the HOA office. Rumors travel quicker than truth. But this time, they were close. I parked, walked inside, and found Laura waiting. Words spreading, she said. Someone leaked the complaint. I looked at her carefully. Not you. She shook her head. Not me. Maybe Carter. Or the investigator's office. Either way, it's out now. I nodded. Good. Let her squirm in daylight for once. Laura frowned. Pierce, she'll come for you. She already has, I said, and failed. By 6 p.m. The board meeting began at the Desert Hills Community Hall. I arrived early, took a seat in the back. Evelyn stood at the front, wearing her usual blazer, calm as stone. Thank you all for coming, she began. It's come to our attention that false accusations have been made against the HOA board. Her voice was measured, rehearsed. I assure you, every decision we've made is lawful and transparent. Murmurs filled the room. I waited until she said, If anyone wishes to speak, now is the time. I stood. Every head turned. I do, I said. I walked to the front, holding a folder. My name is Thomas Pierce. My wife and I are homeowners here. You know who I am. Evelyn, you know exactly why I'm here. Her expression didn't change, but the tension around her jaw told another story. Mr. Pierce, she said evenly. This isn't the time or place. It's exactly the time and place, I interrupted. You claim transparency, then explain these. I opened the folder, revealing printed copies of the emails, bank transfers, and zoning agreements. This isn't a rumor. This is evidence. The room went silent. A woman in the back gasped. Evelyn's composure faltered for the first time. Those documents are confidential, she said. They were stolen. I shook my head. No, they were shared by a board member who realized theft doesn't stay hidden forever. She stepped back slightly, voice rising. You have no right. I have every right, I said calmly. You took money from this community, falsified votes, and sold land you didn't own, and now you're standing here pretending it's a procedure. I placed the papers on the table in front of her. You can deny it all you want. The state investigator already has the originals. The crowd erupted in whispers, then voices. Is that true? She stole from us. Evelyn tried to speak, but her words drowned in the noise. Finally, she slammed her hand on the table. Enough, she shouted. This meeting is over. She stormed out, her heels clicking hard against the floor. I stayed still, letting the room fill with the sound of truth settling in. Neighbors looked at me with a mix of shock and gratitude. Someone began clapping, others joined, not for victory, but for clarity. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It ripples. When I got home that night, the house felt lighter. Laura was waiting on the porch. I heard. She said softly, "It's spreading fast." I sat beside her, the adrenaline finally wearing off. "She'll deny everything," I said. "But denial is just a delay. Evidence doesn't vanish." Laura took my hand. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "We did." The desert wind carried the faint sound of dogs barking in the distance, the neighborhood awake in ways it hadn't been before. Later, around 11 p.m., I checked my email. A new message from Investigator Reyes read, "We've initiated subpoenas for Evelyn Briggs and Commissioner Dalton. Your documentation was crucial. You should be proud." I leaned back, staring at the screen. Pride wasn't what I felt. It was released, the kind that comes when the system finally moves in the right direction, when the weight of truth begins to balance the scale. I stepped outside one last time before bed. The night was clear, stars sharp above the ridge. The streetlights glowed softly across the quiet houses of Desert Hills, for the first time since this began. The air didn't feel heavy. Justice was no longer an idea. It was alive, moving, inevitable, and somewhere in the distance. I imagined Evelyn staring at her phone, realizing the empire she built on silence had finally found its echo. By morning, Desert Hills had turned electric. The air felt charged, every neighbor whispering, every mailbox buzzing with rumors. I woke around 6:30 a.m. to the faint vibration of my phone. Carter's message read, "It's out. State Ethics Office just confirmed the investigation is public record." My pulse steadied. It was happening faster than I expected. By the time I stepped outside, 2 reporters stood near the entrance of the subdivision, pointing cameras toward the HOA office. I could hear one of them asking a resident, "Did you know your board president is under state investigation?" The woman shook her head, speechless. Truth was no longer buried in files. It had legs now. Laura came out holding her coffee, her face tense but glowing with something like vindication. "You planned for this, didn't you?" she asked. "Not the noise," I said. "Just the timing." Across the street, Evelyn's house was shuttered, her SUV gone. "She's hiding," Laura said quietly. "Or plotting," I replied. "She'll try to frame this as harassment. People like her don't crumble in silence. They go down performing." The desert wind carried the faint sound of a news van door slamming. For once, it wasn't me being watched. It was her. By 9 a.m., the HOA's emergency notice appeared on every resident's email inbox. Urgent community communication meeting, 3 p.m., attendance required. I almost laughed. Evelyn wasn't giving up. She wanted control of the narrative. She's going to talk herself into a corner. I told Laura. All we have to do is let her. Still. I printed new copies of the financial transfers and zoning records, each page marked with the state case number. Facts are armor when used with precision. At 2:45 p.m., the community hall parking lot overflowed. Pickup trucks, sedans, and even golf carts packed the dirt shoulder. Inside, the air was thick, restless. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other with nods of defiance when Evelyn walked in. The murmur dropped to silence. She looked different, tired, cornered, but still wrapped in the habit of authority. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "There's been some confusion regarding certain allegations." Her tone was brittle. "I assure you, everything is being exaggerated by a few disgruntled individuals." I waited in the back row, silent, until Carter entered and took a seat beside me. "Reyes confirmed they've subpoenaed the HOA's bank." He whispered, "She doesn't know yet." "She will," I said. "Right now." Evelyn clicked through a slideshow on the projector, showing photos of community improvements. Each picture looked suspiciously generic, taken from stock archives. I stood up. "Mrs. Briggs," I said, my voice calm, cutting through the low hum. Those photos aren't from Desert Hills. That's Sedona Ridge HOA. Different county, different budget. Why are you showing us someone else's property? The room turned. Evelyn froze for half a second before smiling tightly. Mr. Pierce, she said, this isn't your turn to speak. No, I said, but it's your turn to explain why the Department of Housing just released your audit summary. I held up a printed copy. It says $73,000 were withdrawn from Desert Hills HOA's account and funneled through Horizon Vista. It even lists the check numbers. Should I read them aloud? The crowd stirred like dry brush catching flame. Evelyn's voice cracked for the first time. That information is not for the public. It is now, I said. Case number 23862B. A voice from the side shouted, Is that true? Evelyn. Another followed. You used our money. Someone else yelled. My dues went up last year. Evelyn tried to regain control. None of you understand, she snapped. Everything I did was for the good of this community. I stepped closer. No, it was for the good of your land deals. The state has your signatures, your emails, and your zoning requests. This meeting isn't a defense. It's your confession. Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped the podium. You think you're a hero? She said. You're just another man with a grudge. I met her eyes. No, Evelyn. I'm a man who stopped believing silence was respect. Then came the moment I hadn't planned but had prayed for. The door opened, and two men in suits entered. Reyes was one of them. Mrs. Briggs, he said clearly. We're here to serve an immediate suspension notice from the State Housing Oversight Commission. Effective today, you are relieved of all duties pending formal charges. The gasp that followed felt like thunder. Evelyn's color drained. You can't do this, she said, voice breaking. This is a private meeting. Reyes held out a folder. So were your bank transfers. She tried to leave, but two residents blocked her path. Not so fast, one said. You owe us answers. For a moment, she looked almost human, afraid, small, stripped of the veneer she had worn like armor. You'll all regret this, she whispered, before pushing through the crowd and disappearing out the door. The tension broke like glass, the room filled with voices, relief, disbelief, and laughter. Carter leaned back, exhaling. You did it, he said. No, I replied. We did. Everyone in this room just watched justice walk through the door. By 6 p.m., reporters filled the cul-de-sac near the HOA office. The evening sun hit their microphones like spears of light. Laura joined me on the porch, handing me a glass of water. They're asking for a statement, she said. Tell them this, I replied. Tell them community isn't built on control. It's built on accountability. She smiled, the kind that carries exhaustion and peace at once. You really think it's over? She asked. I looked toward Evelyn's house, now dark and silent. It's never over, I said softly, but it's ours again. That night, as the desert cooled, I sat outside under the stars. I thought of every small act that led here, every document printed, every whisper shared, every neighbor who decided to stop looking away. Justice doesn't arrive in one moment. It grows, like roots breaking through concrete. The wind carried the faint hum of a generator from the construction site beyond the ridge, the same ridge Evelyn once tried to claim. Now it stood untouched, glowing faintly under the moonlight, a symbol of what we had reclaimed, for the first time in months. I felt my shoulders ease. The sound of laughter drifted from nearby houses, neighbors gathering in small groups again. The fear that once silenced them had lifted. As I looked across the neighborhood, I realized justice had a sound after all. It wasn't shouting or punishment. It was a conversation, a reunion, Life continuing. Evelyn had lost her power not because someone destroyed her, but because truth refused to stay buried. And as I closed my eyes, I felt the quiet satisfaction that comes only when balance is restored. The system had worked, not perfectly, not painlessly, but undeniably. Justice had stepped into the light, and Desert Hills finally belonged to its people again. The morning after the suspension felt quieter than it should have. The desert was still, the sky overcast, and even the wind seemed to pause before moving. I woke around 6 a.m. to the sound of Laura brewing coffee in the kitchen. The smell filled the house, grounding me in something simple. On the table lay the newspaper, the front page headline reading, HOA President under State Investigation for Fraud and Misconduct. Evelyn's name was in bold, her photo beside it. The caption said she was unavailable for comment. I stared at it for a long time, letting the weight of the words settle in. Power always looks eternal until the morning it isn't. By 9 a.m. My phone started ringing. Reporters, neighbors, and even homeowners from other communities wanted statements or advice. I ignored most of them. I wasn't after fame. I wanted closure. Around noon. Carter called. "You seeing this?" he asked. Reyes's office just filed formal charges, bribery, falsification of records, and misappropriation of funds. 3 counts. He paused. They're saying she's lawyering up. I exhaled slowly. Of course she is. Evelyn's not the type to go down quietly. You think she'll talk? He asked. Eventually, I said. Everyone talks when the silence turns on them. By 2 p.m. Evelyn made her first move. The HOA board issued a statement claiming she was temporarily stepping aside for personal reasons. The phrasing was polished, corporate, but hollow. Everyone knew what it meant, yet she still refused to admit wrongdoing. That stubbornness would be her undoing. Around 3:30 p.m., I drove past the HOA office. The blinds were drawn, the door locked, and a notice taped to the glass read, "Closed pending audit review." A group of residents stood outside, reading it quietly. One of them turned to me and said, "You really did it." I shook my head. We did it. I said again. Now the truth will finish what we started. At 5 p.m. The local news aired a live segment from the county courthouse. Evelyn arrived in a dark suit, sunglasses on despite the clouded sky. Reporters swarmed, their microphones chasing her like wasps. Mrs. Briggs, did you falsify records? Did you accept payments from Vista? She ignored them, walking briskly toward the doors. Behind her, Dalton appeared, the zoning commissioner, pale and sweating. He tried to avoid the cameras, but it was too late. The story had outgrown them both. In the reflection of the courthouse glass, I could see what they couldn't, the beginning of the end written across their faces. That night, the neighborhood gathered in small clusters. The air was cooler, filled with a cautious relief. Laura and I stood on our porch as Mr. Harlan walked over, carrying 2 beers. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing me one. "You gave this place its spine back." I smiled, accepting the bottle. "All I did was shine a light," I said. "The truth did the rest." He chuckled. "That's what light does. It burns." As he left, I looked across the cul-de-sac. Evelyn's house was still dark, for someone who once controlled every inch of this place. Silence had become her punishment. Around 9 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marlene Shaw standing there, the former treasurer who had given me the flash drive. She looked more at peace now, though the weeks of stress had etched lines around her eyes. "I just came to thank you," she said. "You didn't have to protect me." "But you did. They tried to call me today, offered me money to retract my statement." I frowned. "You said no." "Of course," she said. "I've lived with fear long enough. I'd rather live with truth. I nodded. Then you already won. Later that night, I turned on the TV. Evelyn was on the screen again, this time sitting in a courtroom. No blazer, no podium, no control. Her lawyer spoke for her while she stared straight ahead, jaw tight, eyes hollow. The judge read the charges clearly, each one landing like a bell toll. Count 1 fraud, count 2 bribery, count 3 falsification of public records. When asked if she understood the charges, Evelyn finally spoke. Yes, Your Honor. The voice was barely a whisper, stripped of the arrogance it once carried. It was the sound of consequence. After the hearing, Reyes called me. It's official, he said. She's being held pending bond hearing. The state will move forward with restitution claims. That includes reimbursing homeowners for lost funds. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It's done, I said finally. No, he replied. It's beginning again, but this time without fear. When I hung up, Laura was beside me. Is it over? She asked. I took her hand and smiled. It's balanced. That's enough. I stepped outside one last time that evening. The night was calm, a soft wind stirring the sand along the driveway. Across the street, lights flickered on one by one, small symbols of life returning. Justice doesn't erase the scars, it just lets them breathe. I thought about Evelyn, about how people destroy themselves trying to own what was never theirs to begin with. Some truths take time to bloom, and others explode all at once. Hers had done both. As I looked toward the dark horizon of desert hills, I felt that rare stillness that comes only after a long fight ends. Not triumph, not vengeance, but equilibrium. The kind that hums quietly in your chest and reminds you that every lie, no matter how protected, eventually steps into the sun. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, then stays. The morning sun over desert hills looked different. It wasn't brighter, just cleaner, as if the air itself had been scrubbed of something heavy. The HOA office door still had the audit notice taped to it, curling at the edges from the heat. Neighbors walked more slowly now, nodding to each other without the tension that once filled every glance. I stepped outside with my coffee, watching the light spill across the gravel driveway, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to check over my shoulder. The quiet no longer felt dangerous, it felt earned. Laura joined me, holding her mug, her hair pulled back loosely. It's strange, she said. After everything, it feels too normal. I smiled. Normal is underrated. She laughed softly. You ever think about what comes next? Maybe fixing the fence, I said, or sleeping through the night. Her smile faded into something gentler. You did what nobody else could. No, I said. We did what everyone should have. We stopped pretending rules were stronger than people. The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of cicadas. Even they sounded like part of the balance being restored. Later that afternoon, Carter stopped by with a folded newspaper. Thought you'd want this, he said, handing it over. The headline read, State Files Civil Action to Recover Funds from Former HOA President. Beneath it, a smaller note, Local Veteran Credited with Exposing Fraud. I set it down without opening it. That part doesn't matter, I said. It's not about who found it. It's about what gets rebuilt afterward. Carter nodded. Still, people should know. I shook my head. They already do. Every time they walk out their door without fear. That's proof enough. By evening, the neighborhood gathered again. This time not out of anger or suspicion, but gratitude. Children rode their bikes down the cul-de-sac, the sound of laughter echoing between houses that had once been quiet out of caution, Mrs. Harlan brought pie, and someone strung up lights across 2 driveways. It wasn't a celebration. It was something better, something honest. I saw Marlene standing near the fence, talking freely, her voice steady. She caught my eye, raised her glass, and smiled. For the first time since this began. She looked whole. As the sun dipped below the ridge, I walked toward the lot that once sparked everything. The empty patch of land Evelyn had tried to seize, the stakes and survey flags were still there, faded and leaning. I picked one up, brushed off the dust, and drove it into the ground again. Not as a claim, but as a marker. It wasn't about ownership. It was about truth staying visible. The desert light hit it at an angle that made it glow for just a second before the shadows swallowed it again. It reminded me that justice isn't a moment. It's a maintenance. You keep it by not looking away. Later that night, I stood in the backyard, the stars stretching across the sky like a map without borders. Laura leaned against the doorframe, watching me. "You're thinking again," she said. "Always," I replied. "About what? How close we came to losing everything without a single shot fired." "But we didn't," she said. "And you made sure of that." "No," I said quietly. "We just remembered who it all belongs to." She stepped closer, her hand brushing mine. "Then remember this too," she whispered. "It's over now." I nodded, though I knew some things never really end. They just settle into memory, waiting to teach the next person who needs the lesson. If this story reminds you of the power of standing your ground, of defending what's right when no one else will, stay with us. There are more stories like this waiting to be told, each one a piece of truth that deserves its voice. Subscribe and keep watching HOA Chronicles, where every fight for fairness finds its light.